Guten Morgen, Leserinnen und Leser, wie schön, dass Sie Ihren Weg zu uns gefunden haben. Hören Sie mich gut genug? Das wird sich gleich ändern, weil wir müssen die Sprache wechseln und ich bitte schon jetzt um Entschuldigung, wenn mein behelfsmäßiges Englisch Ihnen nicht so gut gefällt wie das von Eva Illouz, aber so ist es. Und wir sprechen üblicherweise Französisch und ich dachte dann doch vielleicht lieber Englisch für Sie. Good morning, this is what I just said and just expressed my gratitude to all of these who are here this morning. But of course it is my particular pleasure and our honor actually to welcome Eva Illouz, whom we chose a couple of years ago as one of the major thinkers of the world, whom we supposed to shape the future's world thinking. And there she is. This is what she has been doing since. Professor of sociology, as you know, as well in Jerusalem as in Paris. Leading expert in emotions in modern capitalist societies. You know, a couple of her books, her major topic was romantic love, but since she changed the topics. And the new book, as you can see, I've read it and can just recommend it to you. I think it is her major and most important book, and though I read all of them, but this year is different. It is as if she wrote a novel about the world we are living in today. It talks about emotions, about hope, about envy, about disappointment, anger, shame, and jealousy. So tell us first, how did you come to write a book about these emotions in our turbulent political times we are living in?
So, thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Elisabeth. You know, sometimes psychologists describe what they do as enabling the patient who comes to them, who is suffering from something, to re-describe their story. And I think I read quite a lot of things on modernity. And what I wanted to do is find a way to re-describe things we know, but differently. Tell the same story, but differently. And I do think, like psychologists or like psychoanalysis, that re-description is a way of getting a better hold of reality. And so the overwhelming observation that the book started with is how much we conduct ourselves via the inner life. The inner life has become the kind of ontological plane of reality in which we move. This subjectivity, if you want, this question of who we are, what we want, what we feel, has become almost the defining horizon of our actions. And that is the reason why I started or tried to re-describe the malaise of modernity through a number of emotions.
You might first tell us what is modernity actually. I mean, there are so many different descriptions. It is our times, yes, starting somehow in the times of enlightenment at the end of the 18th century. But what does modernity mean to you? And why do you call it explosive?
So, you know, depending on the dimension you want to privilege in your analysis of modernity, you will shift the beginning in different places. If what interests you is, let's say, the takeoff of capitalism, then probably 16th century, 15th, 16th century is a good place to start. What interests me is this separation of the public sphere and the private sphere. It is the constitution of a private self. For me, the constitution of a private self is very much a modern phenomenon. And the idea of progress, the idea that collectively and individually, we not only can, but we must actually move forward and be better in the future than we were in the past. This is very different, for example, from if you ask a Jewish ultra-Orthodox, for a Jewish ultra-Orthodox, the best is behind. The great grandfathers, of religion, the prophets were the most holy, if you want. And so since then, it's only a story of decadence. Modernity is exactly the opposite belief, namely that we are moving only forward. So these two, and so that would mean 18th century. The rise of the private sphere and the fundamental belief in progress, both individually and collectively, would place 18th century. This is the reason why I start the book with the emotion of hope, which I view as constitutive of modernity.
Well, when I read your book, I was thinking that you are particularly fond of these times of enlightenment and the experience of hope being reborn in a way. Am I mistaken? Are you a particular friend of the idea that hope can be reborn in a modern way, or has hope come to an end? I thought it was your favorite feeling in a way.
It's interesting. By temperament, I think I am both hopeful and I suffer from bouts of despair. So I am. But what I like in hope is that it is the most irrational of all feelings, and this is one of the things I develop also in the first chapter. This is why Christians, it's actually a very Christian feeling, and I really, of all the feelings that Christians, Catholics especially, cultivate, it is the one I like best, because the whole point of hope is to experience it when there is no reason for hope, and it becomes also a political resource. So I look at the shift from theology to politics, and in fact I think a great deal of the use of hope in politics today draws on this theological background of hope as
it comes from far away, in a way. It was reborn in modernity.
But, I mean, so hope is theological because you're hoping that God is going to save you. And so, and a lot of progressive hopes that, for example, Obama, you remember that Obama in 1984 gave a speech that was a sensation. In 1984, he became a sensation, and it was called the Hope Speech. And then he wrote a book that was called The Audacity of Hope. And so Obama really made hope into his main political, I would say, impulse. But he's not the only one. In fact, when you look at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and other politicians in Poland, for example, in communist Poland, hope is a central resource for politics, and it connects politics to theology.
But here we are already in the midst of politics, though, as you just said, emotions of a modern self are first of all private. So how is that related, a political emotion and the private emotion which we all feel so strongly, since we are still in a way modern beings?
So there is a profound, powerful grammar of emotions. Think of the picture, this is an example I gave yesterday, but think of the picture of the Syrian baby that was on the beach of Bodrum in Turkey. I think it was 2016. That picture was seen by the whole world, and it managed to change policy because it created a worldwide feeling of compassion. We reacted in the same way.
Yeah.
Because compassion has become a definition of humanity since the 18th century. Compassion was not so important or not this way before the 18th century. So this is an example of how we shared in common a reaction. Now, let me give you a second example. You remember that Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian streetcar vendor, was asked to pay a bribe by the Tunisian police in order to continue selling his vegetables. He refused to pay. The policewoman slapped him. He went to the authorities and complained. The authorities dismissed him, and he was so enraged that he ignited himself. He set himself on fire. The story was picked up by Al Jazeera, and then this story actually ignited what we called the Arab Spring. It didn't go anywhere, but there were massive demonstrations. So this is a marvelous example of the ways in which emotions, anger here, propagates in the social bond. It propagates, it becomes contagious, and it has real effects. So my previous example is how we react in the same way. Now this example is about how emotion of one single person could have, in fact, a powerful impact on major countries and create a major movement. That is the collective grammar of emotions.
And still, psychologists work on emotions too. And we know your work as a work which is grounded on the knowledge of cognitive psychology too. So you're one among the sociologists who work on the ground of empirical knowledge from psychology. So how does this interfere? So how do you profit from the knowledge of psychologists, and the other way around, what do you make out of it as a sociologist? Because this is your profession.
Oh, wow, that's a difficult question. So let me first of all try to say what it is that sociologists do vis-a-vis psychologists. So in the 1940s or 50s, if women complained about their husbands, for example, they complained that they were bored, or they were not doing anything, or that their husband was detached or distant, psychoanalysis or psychologists would typically advise them to work on themselves and to look at what is wrong with them. 20 years later comes feminism. Feminism looks at the family as a system and looks at the roles that men and women play in it, and no longer explains the malaise that many women were feeling in the family as a pathology and a dysfunction of particular women. It views it as a much more general phenomenon. So the main difference between psychology and sociology, this is what I have tried to do with my books on love, is precisely to try to draw the line between those problems that are mine, let's say, and those that are collective. It is trying to find something that is shared beyond the language of the private self. But now you ask a much more difficult question, which is, what do I take from psychology? So I would say that there are two notions that I think are very important as a sociologist, but which I would take from psychology. One is the notion of denial. And Freud was the first one to put denial as a central mechanism of the psyche. It is, by the way, the last chapter of this book. And I think denial is also politically a key fundamental process. This is maybe what happened when Germany was Nazi. I think many people had to deny what was happening in order for them to carry on their routine. Quite often it is what we all do when we are, for example, in contact, when we have abusive parents or abusive children or abusive partners. We deny. So denial, I think, is a very powerful discovery. That's the first thing I take from Freud. The second, which I take also and which I think is quite important in politics, it is this idea of displacement and projection. That is, the idea that you're not going always to, let's say I envy my neighbor and I feel, or let's say I feel very frustrated. Quite often what happens in politics is that there will be a politician that will come along and that will say, if you are so frustrated, it is because of the Jews, the immigrants, the Syrians. So that operation of displacement, I think, is something that again, for psychoanalysis discovered, and that plays a very important role in politics as well as in our psyche.
Yeah. Well, it would take us days to develop all these ideas, and I think you have got already a feeling of what is in that book. I would like to take one of my favorite characters in whatever you write in order to discuss what your method actually is. And you doubted the character, of course, is Emma Bovary. She is, in Eva Illouz works, like the protagonist of disappointment and of modernity. So she's living with a lovely husband, actually, father of a nice daughter on the countryside in France. Everything's fine. She's like the protagonist of a normal, good life, we would say today. But hélas, she is driven by disappointment. Disappointment, as you say, as a major modern feeling. It's all not good enough, it's all not sexy enough, it's all not hot enough. So it's all not enough. And that's why everything goes wrong. Now, what I would like to ask you, and I've for years wanted to ask you that question, why don't you write about Charles Bovary, this lovely man, protagonist of the good life, actually, of something we all dream of today, living a life that makes sense, having children, being able to act in a way which is useful and helpful. But you never really seemed interested in him. Why?
So I have two answers. First, because the best book that has been written about Charles Bovary has already been written. You cannot possibly write a better book than this one. Yeah. And it is Jean Amery who wrote that book. Yeah. It's called Charles Bovary, Médecin de Campagne. I read it in French, so I don't know how. So I cannot possibly do better than that. Second,
go ahead.
It's because I am Eva Bovary. In fact, the truth is that I think a lot of us are Emma Bovary, and this is why she is such an overwhelming character. Yeah. Flaubert said about her, I think he even says it in the book, that she's stupid. She has a kind of stupidness, and I recognize myself in that stupidness. I mean, it is a kind of, it's the stupidness of romanticism. Yeah. Romanticism is stupid. He makes it stupid in the novel, and that I think is a very modern form of stupidity. And the stupidity of the kitsch imagination, of the kitsch hope, and it is very deeply grounded in us. And so I think that this kitsch and this stupidity is maybe what prevents us from loving Charles Bovary.
I think I wouldn't have to ask that question if your book didn't tell us that our age, our times, politically are times of deep disappointment. So in a much generalized way, Emma Bovary is like a predecessor of what we feel today. The middle class seems to be today the class to sense that the end of our dreams has come. The dreams of modernity, of personal fulfillment, the dreams of the happy self. So, would you agree? Is that our destiny, to understand that we live all disappointed by modernity?
So I just want to bring a reservation to what you said. Emma Bovary dies because she cannot do anything with her disappointment.
Yeah, well,
we live in an era of highly productive disappointment. What do I mean by that? We no longer bear the state of disappointment, but on the contrary, disappointment is the departure point for an incredible amount of activities to alleviate the disappointment and to restart the cycle of consumption. So, you know, consumption is actually based on disappointment. You have to be disappointed by the commodities in order to consume new ones. But it's not only that. I mean, the entire psychological culture is based on the possibility, the dream, and the promise of getting a better self, working on yourself. Politics is a huge machine of promises, of filling again of cycles of promises and disappointment. So disappointment is not in Emma Bovary. Disappointment is a kind of stable state. It's a dead end to which you arrive, and therefore she commits suicide. That is not our disappointment.
Yeah.
Our disappointment is a highly active one, productive one, which in a way prevents us from being ever in the state itself of disappointment.
Well, yes, but I mean, we all witness today that if this disappointment is like a driver of our capitalist modernity, it is one of the reasons for ecological destruction at the same time. We have all consumed too much, or in the wrong way, or however you put it, but we are all witnessing an exaggeration which makes us feel uncomfortable today. So can you think of a politician standing up in any of our societies and saying to the public, sorry, we promised too much? Is it possible that some of us moderns say and admit that these promises cannot come true any longer? Or how do you think about that? Sometimes I think that the poor Greens are suffering this destiny now, that they are the ones to say it was all too much, we promised too much, and therefore now.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Honestly, think of yourself. If somebody came to you, a politician, and said, we promised too much, wouldn't you be a bit disappointed? Wouldn't you feel that that it is a bit pale as a message? On the contrary, I mean, look at Trump, make America great again. I mean, he's about, he promises everything and anything. I don't think anybody is actually if you have Trump in front of you, do you think Kamala Harris would have a chance if she said, Trump is promising too much and I will tell you the truth, I cannot promise too much? That would mean a kind of acknowledgement of, if you want, incapacity or incompetence or unresourcefulness that she would never dare to acknowledge. So politics has become really the realm of fantasy and imaginary. In a way, we live in a fantasy world also, in the world of politics, in the same way that we live in a fantasy world in the world of commodities.
Yeah. But you know, I was thinking of the famous words of Winston Churchill when he said, all I can offer you is tears and pain. And people were not disappointed to hear that, because it was the only way to say the truth, actually. So that is why I would in the end, ask you the question about truth.
Small question.
Very small question about truth. Apparently, feelings, emotions seem to stick better and feel more true to us today than data do and facts do. And in a way, we seem to prefer the truth of emotions, of anger, of fear, in order to look, instead of looking to the data, to the statistics, to all your empirical studies, and see that we are mistaken when we believe our feelings. So, what about the truth of facts and the truth of feelings? Are you a fighter against the wrong truth of feelings? Is that a good description of what you're doing?
No, you're absolutely right. Stories, emotional stories feel true. This is the reason why they are so precious to the political sphere. I mean, Trump knows exactly what he's doing when he says that Haitians are eating dogs and cats.
Yeah.
He is actually, it doesn't matter to him if it's true or not. He is crafting a story that will activate some fundamental racist belief or feeling of threat. So, and there is a piece that I find, a piece of data that I find quite fascinating, and it is that the number of people who vote for Trump is quite steady. It doesn't matter how much he is found to be criminal by the courts. It does not matter how outrageous what he says is. It doesn't matter that he lies. It is as if there is a whole part of the electorate that seems to be completely impermeable to facts, exactly what you were saying. And the reason why they are impermeable to facts is because their basic orientation, their basic needs are emotional. And emotions are very precious, they're very useful to us, but they are what cognitive psychologists call cognitive shortcuts. They are very quick ways of making a judgment about reality. They don't really want to know reality. What they want quite often is the opposite. They want to confirm what you already know. And it is quite interesting that a great deal of the information, what we call the information sphere today, one of its function is not so much to give us new information, new data, but simply not to challenge and to reconfirm what we already think. When what we call the bubbles of information have this confirmation function. And that is one of the main, if you want, characteristics of emotion, which is to develop this kind of steady attitudes towards the world, which does not let those facts change them or modify them.
That would mean that facts and knowledge and complexity will be the losers of the process we're in. Are they condemned to lose this battle?
Lose, I don't want to pronounce anything very final, but I do think that something, this is something I presented 2 or 3 days ago. I think there is something about the quality of our thinking that has changed as a result of this circulation of emotions and ideas. What are viral ideas? What is virality, which we are so much exposed to? Viral ideas are most often ideas that touch upon sacred values. So we become much more moral. We react to the sense of indignation that some of our moral values have been desecrated. And so when we talk about emotions, what we need to add to this is that these are not just any emotions, these are moral emotions. So the reason why it has become so much more difficult to speak is not only that we are emotional, it is that these emotions are moral emotions. They express our indignation towards something in the world that we dislike. So something in the quality of our thinking, I think, has changed because thinking has become, I would say, contaminated by these moral emotions, not emotions, know that I make a difference, by these moral emotions. It is as if in order to think you needed to prove that you were moral. And that, I think, is a profound change of thinking.
Yeah. Very last question, our time is over. I heard you say, and that's why I would like to quote you, hopelessness is not an option. So please give us your personal answer to finish our discussion. What's left of hope?
Thinking. Honestly, thinking. I think that there is a lot of wrong ideas around, but a lot of incredible energy for the good around as well. The two go together, but I do think that something personal that happened to me after October 7th is the sense that something in the structures of our thinking was collapsing. And I think we have reached a point where many of us see that the structures of thinking have collapsed, and where we are now, we're going to rebuild those structures of thinking that have collapsed. I do see that, yes.
Je te remercie de partager tes idées avec nous. Thanks a million for having come. Danke Ihnen allen für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Vielen Dank, Eva Illouz.